Today, I'm going to be telling you 3 true crime stories linked by a single theme. All of these cases have final photos associated with them that are particularly haunting or which have unsettling context behind them. My name is Nigel, and as always, if you find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime cases done with a mysterious storytelling vibe. And if you'd specifically like to see more stories like these, be sure to let us know that as well in the comments section below. With that out of the way, let's dive in. On November 4th, 2023, a 23-year-old Brazilian woman named Ayeli Alves met up with her boyfriend, 27-year-old Diego Fonseca. The pair had planned to spend the day hanging out at a ranch property owned by Diego's uncle in Jatai, a municipality located about 300 miles from the capital of Brasilia. Ayeli and Diego had been together for about a year and 7 months, and over that time their relationship had had a lot of ups and downs. Sometimes the pair seemed like they were very happy together, but at other points things had been incredibly toxic. This was especially true on Diego's end of things. He had been physically abusive towards Ayeli on multiple occasions. In fact, they had recently separated after one of these incidents, in which Ayeli was left with bruises all over her body. Even so, the pair had continued seeing each other, and this trip was intended in part to be a chance to reconcile. An opportunity for them to get away for the day and just enjoy each other's company, as well as some time outdoors. Unfortunately, though, as I'm sure you've already guessed, that's not at all what happened. At around 10 p.m. that same day, a car raced up to the entrance of the local Das Clínicas hospital. Immediately after coming to a stop, the man behind the wheel got out and began screaming for help. It was Diego, and he was saying that Ayeli had been shot. Medical personnel rushed out to the vehicle, where they found Ayeli lying in the passenger seat. She had a single gunshot wound to her chest. Doctors did everything they could, but sadly, she was pronounced dead a short time later. When police arrived at the hospital, they spoke to Diego, who told them a harrowing story. He said that he and Ayeli had been the victims of an ambush that night. Diego explained that they had been on their way back from his uncle's ranch when they came to a stop on the road. As they did, suddenly 2 men pulled up alongside them on a dark-colored motorcycle. Without any kind of warning, the man on the back of the bike pulled out a gun and fired through the passenger side window of the car, hitting Ayeli. Now, at first, this story seemed to check out. Armed men traveling on motorcycles is unfortunately a fairly common MO for criminals in Brazil. And while normally these crimes usually involve some type of robbery, random shootings are not unheard of. This is certainly what Ayeli's family initially believed. When her mother met Diego at the hospital, he hugged her while frantic and sobbing and told her that he wouldn't rest until he found the people responsible for her murder. However, as police continued to question Diego, they began to notice some things that weren't adding up. There were inconsistencies in his version of events, and in general, he didn't seem to want to provide a lot of details. Officers soon discovered why when a family member of Ayeli's managed to recover her cell phone and brought it to them. When they started going through it, they were horrified by what they found. It turned out that Ayeli had been recording a video on her phone at the time that she was shot, one that contradicted everything Diego had said. In the video, Ayeli can be seen either sitting or standing behind Diego while he has his back to her. Suddenly, though, he turns around and it's clear that he has a gun in his hand. He points the weapon directly at her as the footage continues to roll. Eerily, the tone of the video is playful, and it doesn't appear that Ayeli feels she is in any real danger. She laughs and jokes with Diego, saying, quote, "Go on, hun, do it. Wow, so delicious." Just seconds later, though, he pulls the trigger and Ayeli drops her phone as she falls to the ground. Now, we can't actually show you the video because, well, this is YouTube. However, I do want to share a still frame from it. This chilling image is the final thing that Ayeli Alves saw before Diego pulled the trigger and she was fatally shot. Just FYI, we have included a link to news articles in the description of this video, which have the actual clip in them for those that wish to seek it out. But I should warn you, it's incredibly unsettling. After police confronted Diego with the video footage, he changed his story, stating that the shooting had been a tragic accident. He said that he and Ayeli had been doing target shooting while they were at his uncle's ranch earlier that day with the same gun, and that he believed the weapon was empty. Authorities did not buy this explanation, especially after they spoke more with Ayeli's friends and family members and learned about the abuse in her and Diego's relationship. Specifically, that Diego had threatened to kill Ayeli in the past, and that he had also physically abused previous romantic partners. Ayeli's mother further told investigators that while Diego believed he and Ayeli were getting back together when they set out on their trip on November 4th, her daughter had other plans. According to her, Ayeli wanted this to be a sort of final goodbye and intended to explain to Diego that day that things between them were over for good. Because of these details and more, police concluded that Ayeli's death was premeditated, and Diego was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find any substantial updates about where this case is currently, but according to the most recent articles in 2024, Diego Fonseca is still awaiting trial. 27-year-old Anastasia Rubinska loved to travel. Her social media accounts were filled with pictures of her past adventures, many of which took her to tropical and historic destinations. However, despite boasting nearly 11,000 followers on Instagram, the image Anastasia would most become known for was not one that she had taken herself. Instead, in the middle of 2023, this photo of Anastasia would make international headlines. And while it may appear innocent at first glance, I promise that will completely change once you know the context behind it. In May of 2023, Anastasia Rubinska arrived on the Greek island of Kos. Kos is part of a chain of islands in the Aegean Sea called the Dodecanese Archipelago. It can be difficult to spot on a map because it's actually closer to Turkey than mainland Greece, but nonetheless, Kos is a well-known and popular spot amongst European vacationers. The tourism industry is also what brought Anastasia to the island, though she wasn't just there for the sandy beaches and beautiful scenery. For her, this trip was the best of both worlds, a chance to combine her love of travel with an opportunity to make some money. Anastasia grew up in Wrocław, a city in southwestern Poland, which is one of the larger cities in the country. Though not a ton of detailed information has been released about her life there. According to media reports, Anastasia was a kind and friendly person who was very trusting of others. She enjoyed socializing and being around other people, and just generally liked to have a good time. After finishing secondary school, Anastasia did some casual modeling jobs and worked in restaurants. Some sources mention she also attended a trade school where she trained to become a hairdresser. Going into the summer holidays that year, though, Anastasia had decided to try something different. She found a job working in the restaurant of a 5-star hotel on Kos. The hotel was in the town of Marmari, an area known for its resorts and which is located along the island's north shore. Making things even more exciting, Anastasia hadn't traveled to Greece alone. Her boyfriend of nearly 10 years, Michal, had managed to get a job at the same hotel, and the two would be living and working together. So not only would they both be able to make and put away some money that would help them back in Poland, they could do it all while spending a ton of quality time together. For the first few weeks that they were there, the trip was everything Anastasia and Michal hoped it would be. The work wasn't too bad, and during their time off, they got to see the sights and just sort of enjoy everything this island paradise had to offer. However, sadly, the fun times were about to come to an abrupt and terrifying end. On the morning of June 13th, 2023, so about a month after the couple arrived on Kos, the island's police department received an unsettling call. It was from Michal, who was frantic and said that he had no idea where his girlfriend was. Michal told police that he hadn't seen Anastasia for nearly 24 hours, and that she hadn't come back to their shared hotel room last night. Even more concerning, she wasn't returning any phone calls or texts, and it appeared that her cell phone had since been shut off. When asked about the previous day, Michal said that he had spent most of it at work. It was Anastasia's day off, so she had decided to go out and do some things on her own. They had planned to meet up at a bar when he ended his shift that evening, but he said when he got off, he couldn't find Anastasia there or at any of the other places they usually hung out. Now, from the sounds of it, police initially didn't seem to think that there was any cause for alarm after hearing all of this. It's not clear why this is the case, though it's possible it has to do with something else Michal would later mention in news reports. The 28-year-old said that a few days earlier, Anastasia had accidentally burned one of her hands while she was working. She put ointments on the area to help with healing, but the burn was pretty nasty and was still hurting. So one of the reasons she had actually gone out ahead of time that day was to do a bit of self-medicating, so to speak. She figured that a few drinks and some marijuana would take her mind off the pain. In fact, Michal said Anastasia had actually texted him that evening saying that she was feeling pretty drunk. All this is to say, it's possible police heard this and assumed that Anastasia had simply gotten carried away and that she would turn up soon. Whatever the case, police began to change their tune when Anastasia didn't show up for work on June 13th. Additional pressure came when her family and friends got in contact with the Polish embassy in Greece, with an official investigation beginning shortly thereafter. Authorities started by turning their attention back to Michal and questioning him further about his activities the previous day. However, he said that this was a mistake. He had nothing to do with his girlfriend's disappearance and explained he had more evidence that they needed to take a look at. Michal showed police the last text message exchanges between him and Anastasia from the prior evening. In them, Anastasia stated that she'd met some new people while she was out. This was around the same time that she had texted saying that she was getting pretty drunk. She also mentioned that she was feeling uncomfortable and sent a location marker through her phone indicating where she was. Obviously, this had worried Michal, especially that last bit. But not long after this, Anastasia sent more messages claiming that she was fine. She stated that she was leaving the bar soon and that one of the people she was with was going to give her a ride back to the hotel on his motorbike. Now, this did not make Michal feel any better. He texted Anastasia back, pleading with her to stay put because he was leaving work and was going to come down there right away. However, he never got any reply. Instead, over the next little while, he received 2 more location markers from Anastasia's phone. They showed that she had moved from the place where she was initially texting him and was not at the bar where they had initially planned to meet. Michal had gone out looking for her anyway, but was unable to find her. After that, there were no other updates because Anastasia's phone had been shut off. The final location Anastasia sent Michal was well over a mile away from where she was supposed to be, and alarmingly was not on the way to their hotel. Using the location data Michal gave them, police and volunteers launched a search. At the same time, they began to review surveillance camera footage in these areas, as well as other places where they believed Anastasia had been on June 12th. What they found not only proved that Michal had been telling the truth all along, it would help them to identify the mysterious new people Anastasia had talked about in those texts right before she went missing. Surveillance videos showed that up until around 7 p.m. that evening, Anastasia had been by herself. Footage from inside a local souvlaki shop captured her walking in alone and looking at some menus at the front counter before leaving. After that, she headed to a nearby mini-market where she purchased some alcohol and other items. It was while sitting on an adjoining terrace outside the business that she was approached by several people. The people in question were a group of 5 men of South Asian origin. They struck up a conversation with Anastasia and eventually left with her. When questioned by police, the men all claimed that they had nothing to do with the disappearance. 4 of them were quickly cleared, though one was not. His name was Salahuddin S., a 32-year-old originally from Bangladesh. He stood out after he was determined to be the man who had given Anastasia a ride on his motorbike when she left the bar later that night. While Salahuddin stated that he had taken Anastasia to her hotel and he had no idea what happened to her after that, CCTV proved this wasn't true. Instead, video showed the pair of them riding together in the early morning hours of June 13th in the same general area where Michal had received that final location marker from Anastasia's cell phone. If you'll recall, this was not in the direction of Anastasia and Michal's hotel, but it turned out it was close to something else. It was right near the house where Salahuddin was living. Upon being confronted with this evidence, Salahuddin changed his story, stating that he and Anastasia went back to his place and shared some more drinks before getting intimate. However, he said that everything was consensual, still claiming that Anastasia was perfectly fine the last time he saw her and that they had simply gone their separate ways. Once again, though, surveillance footage cast serious doubts on this. While there was video of Anastasia and Salahuddin heading to his home, after that, only he was ever captured on camera again. At this point, everyone involved in the investigation was growing more and more concerned about Anastasia's safety, but they held out hope that she would return home safely. Sadly, those hopes were about to be crushed. On June 18th, 2023, so 6 days into the investigation, a member of the volunteer search team alerted police that she had made a heartbreaking discovery while combing through an area of trees in the middle of a field near a salt marsh. She found Anastasia's lifeless body. Anastasia was unclothed and had been partially shoved into some plastic trash bags. Her remains had been covered up with grass and branches, but the volunteer had realized she was on the right track when she smelled the unmistakable and horrifying odor of decomposition. Despite the state that Anastasia's body was in at the time it was found, police were able to learn several things from a subsequent autopsy. The findings told an incredibly chilling story. Anastasia had died from strangulation and had also been restrained, possibly with handcuffs. She had been the victim of a brutal attack, and evidence suggested she had been sexually assaulted. As if all of this wasn't disturbing enough, her killer had gone to the added lengths of cutting off some of her fingers, presumably to make her harder to identify through fingerprints. Following the heartbreaking discovery, police returned to their prime suspect, Salahuddin S. The place where Anastasia's body had been dumped was within walking distance of his house, and by this time they had also found the 27-year-old's cell phone in the same general area. It was recovered in a dilapidated building with its SIM card removed the day before. It's believed this is where Anastasia was killed. Thorough searches of Salahuddin's home cleared up any remaining doubts as to whether he was the killer. Inside, police found 2 knives and a yellow sweater with stains and blonde hair on it. The hair, as well as other DNA evidence, was later found to be a match to Anastasia. Investigators theorized that after driving Anastasia to his home between the night of June 12th and the morning of the 13th, Salahuddin had tried to take advantage of the fact that she was drunk. When she fought back, he flew into a rage, sexually assaulting her and killing her before disposing of her body. In addition to the physical evidence, authorities discovered that in the hours after the murder, Salahuddin had deleted files from both his cell phone as well as Anastasia's. His internet search history revealed that he had looked up information on how to cover up a murder, including how to remove evidence from a body. Finally, he had purchased a plane ticket to Italy to try and flee the country. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, where does that photo I showed you at the beginning of this story fit into all of this? Well, it's one that police came across while they were looking for surveillance footage to retrace Anastasia's steps on the day of her disappearance. This is the last known image of Anastasia by herself, and it was taken as she exited the mini-market that evening. In other words, right before she went to the place where she would ultimately meet her killer. There's one other disturbing thing that we came across while researching this story that I wanted to mention, and that's the fact that there might be other victims connected to this case. You see, shortly after the news of Anastasia's murder was reported, an eerily similar account started making headlines. The story came from a 30-year-old woman identified only as Maria, who said that she believed she had very nearly suffered a similar fate. A few days before Anastasia's disappearance, she was also alone when she was approached by a man from Pakistan. Maria said she was waiting for a friend when this man approached her and struck up a conversation. During that time, he was apparently able to slip something in her drink. Maria claimed that the man became very insistent about her finishing her beer, and not long after, everything went dark. Her mind was still aware of what was going on, but her body was almost completely paralyzed. That's when the man tried to sexually assault her. Thankfully, Maria said that at the last second she was able to call out for help, and the man ended up running off. Terrifyingly, she told local media that all of this happened only a few dozen feet from where Anastasia's body was eventually found. Even more alarming, she stated she was convinced that her attacker was part of the group of men that hung around with Salahuddin. Now, as far as we can tell, not much became of these accusations, and it's unclear if Maria was able to identify a specific person as her attacker. Still, it's pretty horrifying to think about. As for Salahuddin, he was convicted of multiple charges, including kidnapping and manslaughter with intent. At the end of 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison. On June 26, 2021, 15-year-old Elif Cakal left her home in Istanbul, Turkey, to do something she had done countless times before. It was a Saturday, and like most teens her age, she was eager to get out of the house and start the high point of her weekend. Now, as far as Elif was concerned, there were no formal plans that day. Earlier, she had been contacted by two of her close friends, Sanem and Twana, and they had all arranged to get together at one of their usual hangouts, a local green space in the north of the city called Gemili Park. After meeting up that afternoon, the three girls spent some time talking together, but in typical teenage fashion, they quickly got bored. That's when they called up a couple of older guys that they were also friends with, named Ufuk and Gurkan. At first, the group did a little shopping, but eventually they decided to take advantage of the fact that Ufuk had his dad's car. They drove around aimlessly for a bit, before someone suggested heading up to an area in the nearby village of Cebece. Specifically some cliff tops which overlooked a local mining site. The area had some scenic views of the village and was a good place to take pictures. It was also the sort of spot where a group of young people could hang out and be left alone. Of course, that isn't always a good thing. Sometime late that same afternoon, emergency responders were called to the Cebece stone quarry. They arrived to find the friends, all of whom were now extremely distraught. The reason for this became clear once authorities walked up to the place where the group had been hanging out. You see, only 4 of them were still there. Elif was at the bottom of the cliff, and she was dead. When they were asked what had happened, Sanem, Twana, Ufuk, and Gurkan told police that they didn't really know. They said that for most of the day, things had been fine. Everyone had been upbeat, they were having fun, they'd been joking around, but all of that changed shortly after they arrived at the quarry. That's when Elif, who up until then had been acting normally, just completely lost it. According to the group, it looked like she was experiencing some kind of psychotic episode. She started screaming and yelling and tearing her own hair out, and then she said she wanted to die. They explained that they had tried to calm her down, but it hadn't worked. Without warning, she ran for the cliffside and just launched herself off, falling to her death. In terms of why all of this had happened, the friends said that they weren't sure, but they admitted that they had been drinking that afternoon. They stated that Elif, in particular, had been going at the liquor they'd brought with them pretty hard, and that recently she'd also talked about problems she was having with a boyfriend. However, they never thought that she'd do anything like this. Based on reporting we were able to find about this story from Turkish media outlets, it seems that at first police more or less believed this version of events. The whole thing was looked at as a horrible accident, a teen who was going through some issues that no one had really been aware of, and who ended up tragically dying due to a combination of mental struggles and her own recklessness. However, all of that would soon be turned on its head, and sadly, the truth was even darker than anyone could have imagined. Everything began to unravel when, as part of their official investigation into the incident, police got a look at the cell phones of all of those involved. That's when they stumbled across something absolutely horrifying. It was a video that had captured the lead-up to Elif Cakal's final moments. The video shows Elif being mercilessly beaten by Sanem and Twana. In the footage, she struggles on the ground as she is hit, punched, kicked, and slapped repeatedly while screaming and crying for the abuse to stop. Rather than trying to help or intervene, the two older boys simply stand and watch, and are clearly the ones recording the footage. While we can't show you the actual footage because this is YouTube and it'd almost certainly get this video taken down, excerpts of it are available online for those that wish to seek it out. I have to warn you though, it's incredibly disturbing, especially once you know the context. That being said, what I will do is show you a still image, since that is the point of today's video. What you're seeing right now is one of the final moments before Elif went over the cliffside. As you might imagine, when police discovered this awful video, they also started to question everything else that they had been told up until that point about Elif's death. And it wasn't long before they began to believe that this whole thing was no accident. So, was Elif pushed off the cliff, or did something else happen? Unfortunately, the truth is, we can't be certain either way. A lot of the details in this case still appear to be disputed, and truly, no one really knows what happened that fateful day other than the people that were there. That being said, prosecutors would later argue that even if Elif's actual death was not intentional, that didn't really matter. Whether she was pushed or she fell while trying to escape the attack, the incident was clearly closer to a murder than an accident. To support this, they pointed to the actual content of the video, in which Sanem could be heard asking Afuk to record her beating Elif up. There were also apparently WhatsApp messages between the four friends that were recovered from their phones, which suggested that the group had planned in advance to attack Elif that day. Even the alcohol was reportedly part of that plan. According to prosecutors, they intended for Elif to get too drunk to defend herself. As for why all of this happened, again, we don't have much to go on other than reading between the lines of statements made by the culprits themselves. In news reports we came across, the female suspects talked about how they had fought with Elif plenty of times in the lead up to her death, and that she had been angry with them over a situation with her boyfriend. Again, there was almost no information we could find about the specifics of this dispute, though one article mentions that it might have had something to do with Elif's boyfriend following one of her friends on Instagram and the friend following him back. When the footage of Elif being beaten by her supposed friends made its way out through Turkish media, a ton of public outrage followed, especially when Elif's family claimed that Twana and Sanem had actually been threatening her before her death. All four of the suspects were arrested shortly afterwards. Given the publicity, when the case finally made its way to court in late 2023, prosecutors were expecting hefty sentences to be doled out and requested between 25 and 40 years in prison for all of the accused. However, that's not what happened. In the end, Sanem and Twana each received 13 years and 4 months, largely because they were minors at the time. Afuk and Gurkhan, meanwhile, were sentenced to just 5 years apiece. To this day, Elif's family say that they do not believe the case was properly handled and that they are still fighting for justice to be served for her murder. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.